of that person, you can give all the subsidies you want and perhaps the person will be employed. But again, if you think of the side effects, and particularly the effects on older workers, then you have to start doing other things. For example, you start to have asking the firm that they don't lay off an older worker if they're going to hire the younger one, or you want to make sure that the firm is not just over-employing people in very low productivity tasks just because it's cheap to do so. And when you start thinking of all these secondary effects, then in the design of programs, you start having to introduce different requirements, administrative procedures, and it becomes so complicated that even a program as simple as that, as subsidizing the worker and the firm, becomes in the end obsolete. In Mexico, a very similar program that started in 2006 had to be canceled 2 years later because of very low take-up by the firm and by the workers. And the main reason was the huge costs that the firm had to incur in, mostly administrative costs, because it was so problematic to manage these kinds of what apparently were very easy employment schemes. So that is one of the reasons why I think these types of programs are not having the effect that they're having. And in the end, I will comment on where I think could be some of the ways forward. But also workers face costs in accessing these programs. Another big issue, and this has to do more with technical and vocational education, is that one of the things that have changed over time are the expectations that young people have about their professional future. For example, there's the OECD 2004 report on jobs where they show a very striking figure. In countries like Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Belgium, that have a very long tradition in technical and vocational education, only around 15% of young workers actually expect and aspire to have a blue-collar job, even if it's specialized. Most of a vast majority of the young generations want to have a white-collar job, mostly related to higher education, where you can get a much greater wage. And at the training programs and professional and vocational and technical education are not generally perceived as being a guarantee of accessing higher education. And one of the reasons why that is so unattractive is because the returns to higher education have been increasing seemingly around the world, definitely in Latin America. The slide has some figures on that, and you can see the red line is the relative return of higher education relative to upper secondary. The blue line is upper secondary relative to lower secondary. But with higher returns and increasing returns to skills, these kinds of jobs that require only a technical process, technical education or training process are less attractive. Which the study points out to several different ways of addressing these issues, and I think there is one particular reference point that is very useful for thinking about the future. When you think about the formal education system and how it has worked for many, many years, for centuries, the system works in a way where people, by going to certain school, get some credentials, get a degree. So if you go to a top US university, that tells the employer a lot about who the person is, what the person knows, what the person can do, what type of person, what type of profile this person has. So the degree is a great signaling mechanism to make life easier for employers and for employees, and employees invest in acquiring these kinds of credentials. And also firms invest even in, for example, master's degrees for their employees so that they can get these credentials, and they do it under a scheme where the employee signs a contract saying that they will go back to work to the firm or there will be a penalty if not. In TVET, the schemes are very different, and I think that having the formal education system as reference helps thinking about the future. For example, what happens if, apart from doing what the book sets out, we think of systems where the standards are set not by the trainers, as is now a trend in some countries, but by the employers. Also, the education curriculum, at least in upper secondary education, is determined with very large participation of employers. Also, of course, training institutions have to have credibility of high quality. They have to have a very credible system of evaluation as a university. A top university is credible in part because it guarantees that only very good people with certain skills graduate. And this kind of system in the labor market is already in operation in some countries and has to do with certification processes. Certification as a way of signaling the quality and the type of training that someone gets that is valuable for the employee and also for employers. Perhaps this is of course complementary to what the book already mentions, and I think it could be an interesting avenue to make even on-the-job training much more efficient and close the skills gap. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. You clearly have a lot to say on the topic, and my attempts at getting you to focus on one aspect of it did not work. I also realize I lose control when you go up there, so I'm going to think twice about the strategy going forward. Okay, I'm going to turn to Klaus Zimmermann next. Before I do that, let me mention that we collaborate very closely with Klaus, certainly in the context of ISA. And we worked together in particular on the Jobs Knowledge Platform. And in that context, I wanted to mention that this launch is actually being live streamed on the Jobs Knowledge Platform Facebook page. We're getting more and more sophisticated, and we're also the event there is live tweeting that is going on as we speak about the event. So all of that is very exciting. So Klaus. Of course, you come from Germany, and Germany is a country that has been outperforming many other countries in Europe in terms of productivity growth. And this is in part attributed to the famous dual training system of Germany, which combines in-class TVT with on-the-job training. And as the book discusses, many middle and low-income countries have tried to develop TVET, but because of government failures, primarily weak governance and poor incentives, these programs have not always produced the expected results, the type of training and graduates that would allow the graduates to find jobs more easily. So the question, and this comes up quite often, why is it that Germany is able to succeed? What is so special about the German model? And is it exportable? Can other countries replicate the main features of the German system?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm also have to stress that I'm very happy to be here and be a partner in this important presentation of a book, what I also think comes at the right time. I was just over the last months traveling to many places of the world, and the issue we are dealing here with, to what extent we have to extend our training strategies to connect jobs with the provision of knowledge that has to be rethought. And it's interesting that it's everywhere. In all, it's in China, it's in Australia, it's in Sweden, for instance, or also in the United States. I know there's a rethinking of the issue. The key issue in the past was, I mean, we have, since education becomes so important, and knowledge has become so important, that at best everybody gets a university degree. That was kind of the vision. And I think certainly having better higher qualifications at times where knowledge is disappearing day by day and has to be regained is certainly important. So it's the skills to acquire knowledge. But also we realize that the closeness to what's going on the job, what is really necessary, which goes also very speedy, forces us to bring together more firm-specific training especially with young workers. Now, the German model, I hesitate to say model because, well, we have these systems not only for years, not only for decades, we have it for hundreds of years. So, and Germany has not always been upfront. So I would not say that the current performance of Germany, well, which is a different way of dealing with, the current performance has now directly, well, this as a cause. I mean, this is maybe one aspect of many aspects. So I warn in general that there is not the model. I mean, that's, I would say. That's also true for the German system. However, I mean, the German system is attractive because it brings people, young people, early in their career to education, and it brings them to work. So the transition from school to work is a very important issue. It has a very long cultural tradition. It's part of German culture. It has historical roots in the craft system, for instance, and centuries ago. It's part of the German model of the social market economy, which is not socialism, sometimes mixed up. Well, it's also not market economy, but Germans are not really so much lovers of markets, but okay. So it's part of what we think is social responsibility of companies. Yes. Well, it's of course provision of firm-related human capital, which may play more a role in Germany than in other countries. That's one of the things. But also, it's not only a mixture of companies with the state. So the state is not so central. It's also social organizations, employers' organizations play a big role, and of course there are many ways to make the thing profitable. Of course, the debate about poaching is a big one, also in Germany. Every year again, if not everybody gets a training place, there is a debate of social responsibility of companies not to fulfill them. Now, of course, there is this argument pros and cons, and there are many ways to understand that companies, it's in their own interest to do this. First, German companies use this as a part of a recruitment strategy. Yes, instead of hire unknown people, which you soon have to give a lifetime contract, so to speak, a permanent contract, you have for a number of years, 3 years, a chance to investigate the talents, to learn with the people, to find out the talents, and you do not have to take over, but you mostly take over people who have completed the training. There's also, of course, a possibility to contract out financial responsibilities. So either workers could be obliged, also young people, to pay back part of the training costs if they leave the company too early, or also other companies, if they take over the people could pay for it. Now, the issue is, of course, how can this be exported? I mean, in principle, the model was there. I mean, why hasn't it been used more effectively? So most people who look at the relevance of social organizations and of the connection between employer organizations and the companies to engage in that. And that's, I guess, what is not easy to replicate in developing countries. However, it could be not only the partners could be not necessarily the state. It could be social organizations. It could be family networks. It could be trade unions. It could be churches. It's not that we would be limited in that process to the exact structure of the German system. So I would like to maybe close at this round here by saying yes, this is certainly part why Germany has such a low youth unemployment rate. It's one of the lowest in the world in relationship to general unemployment in the country, and this certainly has to do with that program. But it's also has its weaknesses and problems, so we have to be cautious when we simply export it.
Thank you very much, Klaus. So Adriana, I'd like to turn to you, if I may. We've talked already quite a bit about the changes that we see driven by technological progress. And Miguel talked about the increasingly faster pace of change. And one of the important issues raised in the book is how to adapt the supply of skills to match the changes, often unpredictable changes in the demand for skills driven by this technological progress. So it'd be interesting to get your views, in particular from the perspective of the US. There is evidence that technological progress is reshaping the labor market and the demand for skills. And what we see is that highly skilled workers continue to do well as they end up getting the so-called innovation jobs. And arguably, the unskilled workers also do reasonably well. Their earnings have been growing because their jobs are not as affected by technological change. So the problem, it seems, to reside in those that are in the middle. Those with college degrees working in industry or in services, the accountants, the bank tellers, the paralegals, for instance. The demand for their skills and their earnings have been falling. So my question to you is, do you agree with that diagnostic? What is the magnitude of the problem, and what can be done to align the skills of this set of individuals?
Thank you so much. So first, let me say that this polarization of earnings has been going on at least since the 1980s. Certainly part of this story is driven by technological change, but a lot of it is driven by other factors, including trade and offshoring, which keeps those at the top of the earnings distribution here, those jobs for those people here in the US because they have a comparative advantage, but those at the lower end also here because those are jobs that are non-tradable. So they stay here, so certainly the ones that suffer, the ones in the middle. But there are also institutional factors, including deunionization, minimum wages, and the erosion of minimum wages. There are many factors that have been contributing to this for decades. So it's certainly not a new phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that has been going on for decades. I think the skills gap is certainly a problem. I think it's been overemphasized, and it's been overemphasized precisely at this point. You know, I can give you at least 6 points of evidence that tell us that most of what we see today, the unemployment that we see today, is driven by lack of demand, by slack demand as opposed to skills gap. I'm not saying that the skills gap is not an issue. It's always an issue, but it's not greater now in this recovery than it's been in past recoveries, and it's not greater than it's been in the past few decades. So for starters, we've estimated Okun's law in the administration. We find that 63% of the increase in unemployment during the recession was driven by the fall in GDP, and about 57% of the increase in unemployment that we've seen since the peak in October of 2009 has been driven by the increase in GDP. So at least 2/3 is driven by changes in GDP, as opposed to any residual factors, which could include skills gaps or other mismatches that could be going on in the labor market. Esteban Sonta from the IMF, I think, have done a very nice job kind of expanding this Okun's law for the states. And they use a panel of states to estimate basically a relationship between unemployment and GSP, so gross state product. And they also use a mismatch of skills at the state level and a mismatch, a geographical mismatch index as well. And they essentially find that only 0.5 percentage points of the increase in the NAIRUD that we've seen in the past few years can be accounted by the skills mismatch index. So again, it is important, but it's not the main driving factor behind the unemployment that we're seeing today. If you look at the Beveridge curve, same story. We see basically that the Beveridge curve, we've been moving back along the Beveridge curve almost in a horizontal fashion to the left. And sure, there has been some shift of the Beveridge curve, which does suggest that there may be increased mismatches, but that's not the biggest part of the unemployment that we're seeing now. It's the fact that we haven't moved all the way back along the Beveridge curve. So this is, again, just to tell you that if we think about the fact that there are many people that have moved out of the labor force and are coming from non-employment into employment, that would suggest a shift. We may not be using the right proxies to estimate this beverage curve at this point in time. So there is some evidence, but certainly, once again, maybe about 2/3 can be explained by slack demand, about 1/3 can be explained by skills mismatches. Sahin and Violanti and others and co-authors have estimated that between 0.8 and 1.4 percentage points of the increase in unemployment that we saw during this recession can be accounted by mismatches. They estimate a mismatch function. So again, very different methodologies, but once again, you arrive to the same answer, which is that about 2/3 of the rise in unemployment during this time period can be explained by slack demand as opposed to skill mismatches. If you look at the information provided by employers themselves, when you survey employers, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, as employers, so, is this really a problem, the skills mismatch problem? About 20% of those employers say that the main constraint they face is slack demand. About 6% of them say that their main problem is the quality of labor. And while today there's 17% of businesses who are reporting that they have a hard time filling up a job, back in 2007, there were 26% of employers who reported that they couldn't fill up a job because they couldn't find the right person with the right skills. So it doesn't seem to be amplifying today relative to what we saw pre-recession. That is not to say that a skills mismatch is not an issue, and of course it's an issue around the globe, and it's an issue in other countries as well. So, for example, Sahin et al. Point out that there are certain sectors where these skills mismatches are really key. Health and education is one of them. Advanced manufacturing, information is another sector that suffers from heavy skill mismatches. So there are sectors where we need to be focusing our efforts in closing those skill gaps. I want to give a few examples of what can we do about it. What can we do about realigning those skill gaps that we find. I can tell you about a few things that have been done out of this administration to deal with this issue. One of them is called TAA-CCT. They're grants provided to people who have been displaced due to trade adjustment assistance, community college career training grants. And these grants basically provide money to generate partnerships between employers and between community colleges. So we do know that oftentimes the community colleges, the training providers are just providing skills that are completely out of touch with the needs of employers and businesses. And it's a very good way to provide seed money and to provide funds to bring those two groups together in a way that is maybe not so natural here in the US because we don't have such strong employer associations as you do in Germany. So we need to make sure we encourage those partnerships that are not already there. The president in the 2013 budget included a community college to career fund for $8 billion that would further encourage these sort of partnerships in order to drive that. The job accelerator grants also make sure that we deal a little bit with the poaching externalities that you mentioned so nicely in your book. I think one issue that we find here, again, is that we don't have these strong employer associations, and in many other countries, we don't have very strong employer associations. So generating, here in this case in the US, regional manufacturing clusters, you provide seed money so that employers actually identify competency models. They identify models about what competencies, what skill sets are needed in a given region, in a given industry, and then they provide money so that the training gets provided by all employers together, and they don't have to worry about poaching from each other who paid, because they paid jointly for the training. So it's a good solution to deal with that issue, as well as identifying the competencies that are necessary at a given point in time. You need to obviously, upgrade these as time goes on, because they don't stay, because technology changes, because the sector changes and the way they function changes, so you need to keep upgrading it. But I have to say one more thing, which is that even if I agree, I very much like the way you identify the market failures and the government failures. I think one has to be careful that just outsourcing these services to the private sector is not necessarily going to do the job, that you need to make those private sector providers also accountable. So a model that has worked in a few countries, including in a program that I evaluated together with Horacio Atanasio and Costas Meyer called Youth in Action, is a pay-for-performance model, essentially, which only pays the provider as long as they actually place the person in a job, right? Or at least it makes it subject to placement. Obviously, in a weak labor market, this is much harder to put in place, but at least you can make the payment to the training provider subject on placing at least a given share of the people they're training into jobs. This was very effective in Colombia. It has been effective in the UK. It has been effective in Australia. And actually, in the administration, as part of the Workforce Innovation Fund, we provided a given number of grants on the basis of pay for performance. And I have to say that it's something that we're still trying. And again, we have to be cautious because it is still not a very strong labor market. We're still in the recovery. So we have to see how it works, and we have to see how it works here in the US. But the idea is that eventually we would do also some experiments and figure out what the effectiveness of these pay-for-performance systems are here in the US.
Great. Thank you very much, Adriana. Okay, I'm going to turn to Branka. Branka, you just finished an important report on youth employment worldwide. And as you know, and David mentioned in his presentation, many of those entering the labor market in developing countries have very low levels of education. Many often have not completed secondary education. So traditional TVET is really not an option for them. So the book talks about the role of targeted training programs that combine life and technical skills, and that can help this group access either wage or self-employment. Do you think this is a viable option, especially at scale? In what kind of settings? And how do you go about designing them in developing countries?
A loaded question. Well, thank you very much for having me here, and congratulations on this important study. I find this book very, very interesting and very informative, and especially in the questions it raises and the work that is in front of us still. We have obviously a great focus on youth unemployment for a number of years, and we all know the numbers, the 75 million young people who are unemployed, but also the disproportion, the 17% of the population is youth, but 34% of unemployed is youth. So if you are young, and it almost doesn't matter even whether you're skilled or not skilled, you have a much lesser chance of getting employment than others, than regular population. So why, and the unskilled group among youth is in the worst, obviously, position of all. So it's not only about skills. What we have found out that there are basically 4 reasons why these young people don't enter the workforce successfully, or transition either from school or transition from out-of-school situations into jobs. It's definitely the skills needed to do the job. It's also the work experience to prove to an employer that they can do the job and they can behave properly in the workplace. It's the information about where are the jobs, where are the companies hiring, and what are the trainings available for those jobs. And finally, they don't have the social capital, the contacts to get a job, and also the role models who can help them shape their job search and their behavior in the workplace. We all know about the hidden job market, that 80% probably of all jobs are never advertised and never are quietly filled. So that's on the side of these young people and their barriers. And in terms of the types of skills that employers are expecting and the young people don't possess, again, there are 4 types of them that we see. One is definitely the job skills, how to do a particular job. Then there is the enterprise skills, how to do that job within an enterprise, where on-the-job training definitely can help. Then you have the whole issue of non-cognitive skills, behaviors, self skills, life skills, however you call them. We call them workplace competences. definitely something that young people are lacking, and employers are hiring many times for job skills, but they are firing for these soft skills. And finally, the work readiness skills. So young people also don't know how to look for a job, how to present themselves properly. So again, 4 huge walls in front of them. Then let's look at the other side of the employers, you know, and that's really, we talk to these employers day in and day out. What are they facing? So we all heard it's the technology, the pace of change is accelerating, the jobs are becoming more complex. I remember when I started in this industry, we would get a phone call for a particular position, entry-level position, and it would be 3, 4, 5 skills. Now you get a position, an entry-level position with 70 skills listed. So, you know, that entry level has changed so much. It's difficult to jump to that first rung of the ladder. And definitely the schools are not preparing young people for that type of complexity. Also, the other thing is that there is tremendous pressure on employers to increase productivity, to deliver more for less, you know, to cut the costs, to increase the profits, and so. And the result of that is this whole concept of just-in-time hiring. They're hiring when they need people, they're de-hiring when they don't need them anymore, and that really is not conducive to the concept of training people, waiting for them to be ready, you know, and putting them in the right positions when the time comes. So obviously, there are programs who are providing some solutions, and I think our research, you know, what companies and what policymakers can do about youth unemployment very much aligns with the conclusions of the book. I think we definitely are